very, very warm welcome to our first webinar of the year 2022 on organizational happiness, walking the talk. And so as usual, we have participants joining from many different countries. And so maybe to kick things off, a few of you have already shared where you're from. Lars, if you go forward in the deck a little bit, then we can see this is very common that our participants come from all corners of the world. And advancing forward, so just to get a quick pulse sense of, what is your motivation for joining us today on this session on organizational happiness? So just type in a number that best captures why you're here today. One would be, I'm curious about the topic. Two is, I want to take some ideas back to my team. Third level is, I'm really ready to implement organizational happiness and just want to know how. Fourth is, I want to know more about organizational happiness walking the talk workshop, because we're running this 5-week workshop starting January 25th. And of course, you could have multiple reasons. So, all right. So some of you, Jennifer wanting to take it back to her team. Ready to implement, Rochelle. Okay. I'm curious about the topic. All right. So Dion, 3 and 4. Okay. Excellent. Titus from Nairobi. Greetings. Want to take some back to you. Okay. Wonderful. So, clearly we realize that there are different motivations for joining us today. And Lars, if you go forward one slide, just to let you know that Lars and I have thought about this session as short, but hopefully at any point in the journey that you're in, it's going to give you something that you can take away and work with, from just large concepts to some tactics and techniques that you can implement right away. So Lars, this is not the first time I'm seeing you. Do you want to introduce a little bit our backgrounds?
Yeah. So let me just start with again, a warm welcome, and happy to see so many here, and a diverse global group. Again, that's what we often see in settings like this when we talk about organizational happiness. So thank you for joining us. So just let me introduce Mohit, the founding director of the UP Center for Executive Education. I met Mohit almost 10 years ago now, I think it is. And we work well together. We like working together. Mohit is an educator, change maker, organizational expert, development expert. And we're both working in the field of leadership, organizational development. We very often, we praise ourselves of having the academic in order, based on sound research, but also focus very much on learning and what works in practice. So the next 40 minutes, we will try to share maybe a handful of things that is really best practice within organizational happiness and real employee engagement that you can bring back, or you can dive further into it, but something that you can take away, and we can even have a slide deck for it. So that's our intention, to give you something the next 45 minutes. As you can see here on the slide, sometimes we really like working together, Mohit and I, and we come from different backgrounds, different countries, different geographies, and so together we have a truly global, diverse perspective on what I would say leadership, organization development, and sometimes the people that knows us well, I see some familiar faces here also. Sometimes they call us the twins. If you don't know what the twins are, maybe you have seen the movie, or maybe there's a reference there, but it's just a little fun about it. We like each other, and we like working together, being in the same room or even on the same channel like here.
Thanks, Lars, and thanks for including the one picture when I was actually taller than you. But on Zoom, we're all the same height, so it's okay.
That's right.
Perfect. Lars, what I think I can do is maybe to contextualize this topic of organizational happiness, I want to give you a little brief background about the University for Peace. And you can see that we were established by the United Nations General Assembly back in 1980. And this is a lofty mission statement, but really the essence of our mission is to help develop and train leaders who can make a positive impact on the world. And when you think about the number of hours we spend in organizations of different shapes and forms, and what I would say is an inherent right to be able to flourish, to be able to be happy, the idea of looking at organizational happiness as such an important component of what brings us together under the umbrella of the United Nations is the connection to the University for Peace. And within the university where we offer graduate programs, the Center for Executive Education brings flexible learnings from this webinar to diploma programs. And so this is the institute with that's offering this session on organizational happiness. So check us out. Lars, did you want to add anything to the center? Because Lars, you first came to Costa Rica and discovered UPeace through the Center for Executive Education.
Yeah, just want to say that check it out. It's I think it's a really cool page, and also offer some of the some nice, like it says transformational education, but it's really nice spot if you can go there. It's a beautiful place to learn and reflect. If you cannot go there, you can still have the virtual diplomas, and I think there are two very cool diplomas here. One is in global leadership, and another one is in social innovation. That's my opinion. I haven't seen those diplomas elsewhere, actually, and I think they're very cool. Check it out if you want to. I think what UPeace is doing is a very cool thing.
Thank you. I know some of you on this call have already taken one of our diplomas. So Lars, moving on to the next slide. This is the way that we're going to structure our next half an hour together. We're going to talk a little bit about the science of happiness, broad level, and then talk about the business case for implementing happiness in organizations. And then this happiness sweet spot, which Lars will cover. And then I'll talk a little bit more about measuring and monitoring to be able to act on organizational happiness. And then we'll talk about how do we put this all together in a strategic roadmap that you could work through your teams with. So that's the flow. Please, at any point, feel free to come off mute and ask a question, or I've got one eye on the chat box. So type in a question and we'll take it whenever the timing is right. So please don't let the fact that there's 35 people on this session to prevent it from being interactive. So in terms of the framework for thinking about well-being or happiness, there are a few different, I would say, approaches to this, but PERMA comes from Dr. Martin Seligman. He has been dubbed as the father of positive psychology. And really, this is a very robust understanding of what well-being, flourishing, or happiness looks like across cultures. And so it's about 5 different independent pillars. And I want to briefly talk about each pillar, because what Lars has done is gone from the science and the psychology of understanding well-being and thought about, well, what does this look like in the context of organizations? So each pillar, one at a time, no more than a minute on each. P stands for positive emotions, right? And these are things like joy. These are things like curiosity, love, awe, hope, even pride, right? Taking pride in the things that you're good at. These are positive emotions. I think we all inherently understand that when we feel positive emotions, it's an important component of happiness. And there's many more pillars. So moving from positive emotions to engagement. Engagement does have many different understandings and definitions, but in the context of thinking about well-being, engagement, the definition of engagement is knowing your strengths and using them. Once again, engagement is knowing your strengths and being able to use them. So very, very important and pillar of well-being. We often can be extremely engaged in doing something, but we may not be smiling, right? So it's different from positive emotions. Often when you're engaged, time seems to go very fast. You're not even aware of your emotions. So I just want to let's go back one slide. So that's engagement. The R stands for positive relationships. We all know that when we nurture positive relationships, when we're in company of people we trust and have these relationships with, we feel good, it contributes to our well-being. Yet the research shows that often we underinvest in these positive relationships, and especially in the modern workplace where there's an urgency to get things done fast. We think about investing in trust building and positive relationships as somehow detracting from the job to be done. So sorry, I'm going to just make sure that everyone's muted. There's some background noise coming in. Let me
inside the calendar. Maybe it's
okay. Can we, sorry, I'm just hearing some background noise, if you don't mind. Thank you. And so then the fourth pillar of well-being, the M, stands for meaning. And this relates to the concept of purpose, but meaning is the sense that our life impacts more than just us, right? And so very important, lots of very interesting experiments done to show the importance of meaning. Again, sometimes we think about how does this serve us, but the short of it is, when we help others, when we see that our lives are impacting others, it actually not only impacts others but also makes us feel better about ourselves. And then the last pillar, which is A, achievement. Achievement is the sense that we're getting better at things that matter to us. Okay. And so what I want to emphasize about these pillars is that while they might seem related, the idea of nurturing positive emotions, using your strengths, having positive relationships, finding meaning, and then having a sense of achievement or accomplishment, they're actually all independent, and we can think about them differently, and they need to be thought of all as aspects of well-being. And so maybe one more slide just before I turn it over to Lars. Lars, if we go to the next slide, this theory of well-being, it's certainly important at the individual level. And I would say that at a national level, there's some very interesting movements that are trying to think about, well, what does gross global happiness look like, right? In the case of Bhutan, how do we measure for those things that correlate much more to, let's say, gross domestic product or gross national product, which are traditional metrics of how a country is doing? So we're moving in the direction where nations are thinking about PERMA at that level. But in this, our focus has been on the organization, and how does our understanding of well-being and happiness play out in how we run and administer our organizations and show up in our organizations. So Lars, I just want to emphasize that even though we are going to focus on organizational happiness, that these other dimensions are also very important. It's just not the focus of what we're going to talk about today necessarily.
Yeah, thank you, Mohit. And I think what you just said, I think about the PERMA model, I just wanted to make that reference. That I think personally, and also when we talk about this, when we are in with groups, it's almost like the PERMA model. If you look at it, it's almost, I think it's almost like a life hack. It's almost like in your personal life. If you want to look, you can look at the PERMA model and think, how am I doing in these 5 areas? So that's just an invitation to more reflection, and I just thought of that when you're saying that. So what the field that we are in, Mohit and I, related to this webinar is around organizations. And I wanted to add that I think organization has both an opportunity, but also an obligation to focus more and work with organizational happiness. It's a win-win-win situation. It's a win for society, it's a win for the individual, and it's a win for the organization. And when I talk about a win for the organization, I just give you a little bit of a background on what is the business case, because very often when we work with this, we are met with sometimes when we walk into a boardroom or a management team say, what hippie happy thing? Why do we need to talk about happiness in the workplace? We just need to be effective and perform. And I just wanted to share with you that there is a solid business case for working with organizational happiness and real employee engagement. It's not a hippie happy thing. It's more than ping pong tables and offering meditation and things like that. It's a really solid business case. And some of the numbers, I just wanted to show you some of the numbers that we are talking about in terms of business case. We have a lot of these cases, both current cases that Mohit and I have been working on and are working on with organizations. So it's something that you need to document. And sometimes we decided to take this business case a headline up front because it's important to note that there is a real business case behind working with organizational happiness. Some of the things are in the area of unlocking potential, what goes up, more innovation, higher retention, increase in sales, increase in productivity. There are a lot more key performance indicators around this that we could work with, but these are some of it. Also, when we talk about engagement or reducing disengagement, depending on industries and depending on what kind of organization you're in, there's a lot less burnout, fewer sick leaves, and less turnover. On the business case, I want just to share with you, now you have a few numbers here, and this is a real, I think it's also, it takes a little bit of diving into the data on the organization you're working with to get the real business case. But one recent one that Mohit and I have been working on, the business case just on the retention was $712,000 yearly. So this is the kind of numbers that you can speak to when you work with organization happiness. And we wanted to take that up front because then sometimes you speak a language that is needed to work strategically with organizational happiness. Yeah. There's a few more numbers here, what goes up. And these are based on some of the cases that we have researched, some of the cases that we know of, that we have worked with, and some academic and cases that is like open source. You can look them up and Google it. We're happy to share more of these cases if you're interested, but these are just some of the numbers that we wanted to share. Lower turnover, sick leave, safety incidents, stress and burnout. So just to take that up front, the business case, and of course you can use the numbers in your own organization based on the data you have for your organization. We also want to offer you a lens, I would say, or a perspective. This is something I have been diving into a lot over the last 2 or 3 years, and Mohit and I have been working with organization and management teams. That's the happiness sweet spot model. Some of you I know knows it already, because I see some familiar faces here. But they have, sure, Mohit.
Yeah, Lars, I just wanted to, and I think that the fact that we today have this robust data that supports the business case for implementing organizational happiness is fantastic. I do want to echo what you said. That is not our motivation for doing organizational happiness, right? We think it is so important. We spend, a third of our waking hours in organizations typically. The motivation to do it is because it's the right thing to do. The justification, depending on who you're talking to, and the ability to really invest in this process is supported by the business case. So I just wanted to highlight that it is a win-win-win, right? It's a win for humanity, but it's also a win at the pure financial level.
Yeah. Thank you for highlighting that, Mohit. And I also think that this is, if you're able to build the business case, and then if you're able to present it in a understandable way, this is where you get from, we sometimes talk about getting from strategy or from talk to action. Mm-hmm. And this is very much what we're working with. How do you get from lip service to changing a behavior in an organization that makes a higher level of well-being, and even an organization that performs better? So the lens I'm going to offer you here, and the model here, is the happiness sweet spot. And this is something I could speak about for hours, and we have workshops on that. But I wanted to give you this so you can maybe dive into it or get an understanding, or a simple, effective tool to work with organization happiness. It's purpose, strengths, and compassion. It's not a one-size-fits-all model, but it's a model that helps you see how are you doing in each of these three, and how could you work more with one of them? Where would you have something that you could do in your organization that would have a big or greater effect in terms of happiness for the individual and organizational happiness? Purpose is really about your organizational why. It's about, in some organizations, we call it an employer value proposition, but it's telling a story or a reason for being that is more than profit. And you need to tell that story to attract top talent and retain the good people you already have in your organization. So that's one area. The second, flipping through this, but of course you can do the exercise yourself on each of these three, is strengths-based leadership. I want to give the example of what is happening when, in many organizations, and many organizations I've been part of, when at the end of the year or at the end of a quarter, you have your annual or your quarterly appraisal. And very often that conversation turns into, what is it that you need to be better at that you're not so good at? What is it that you're not so good at that you need to focus more on? Which, in my opinion, is a losing strategy. A winning strategy is to have a conversation about what's your superpower, what's the real strength, what's the strengths that you have, and how can I, as a manager, put you into a situation where you're using your strengths more for the purpose of our organization. This is almost like a cultural shift for many organizations, because it's a change of the way we interact and the way we speak about. But strength is strengths-based leadership. It's knowing your own strength and knowing the strength of the team that you are part of. This third pillar of organizational happiness, or in the happiness sweet spot, is compassion. Compassion in this model, it's defined as an interest in other people's difficulties and a burning desire to do something about it. I want to emphasize the action part, because very often we talk about empathy as a very important leadership trait. But I think it's more compassion, because in compassion there's action. Empathy can be a very passive thing, but compassion is where you're doing something. You have and a burning desire to do something about it. Compassion is really about leadership, as I see it, and I don't think you can have real leadership without compassion in action. And this can be taught, it can be learned, it can be focused. So that's the third pillar of organizational happiness in this model, the happiness sweet spot. This is a lens you can use. It's like you can look at your organization and see, where can I work more with this? Recently, we published an article on LinkedIn. Also, have a look at it. You can link up with both Mohit and I. But there's so many places to seek out more information on this. I wrote a book about this, the happiness sweet spot. It's also available, but now you have the lens at least, and there are many articles around this subject.
Lars, I wrote a book is right, except that Lars took a couple of decades of working in this area, and what I found particularly compelling about the book is that it is very practical. It goes quickly from the research and the science to how do I operationalize this? What does it mean in terms of what can I do on a day-to-day basis? So yeah, I found it a very practical guide, and I was not surprised then when it became an Amazon bestseller in its category across different geographies, including, I think, Japan was one of the first countries where it became a bestseller in the category of organizational reading. So Lars, yeah, we're waiting for your next book. I think you're going to hone in on compassion, but yeah, I would highly recommend this as a reading for those of you who learn that way. Yeah.
Thank you for mentioning. Thank you for bragging on my behalf, Mohit. It's a relief. So, and then coming from the science of happiness into how can we justify working with this in organizations, and giving you a lens, the three pillars of organizational happiness. Also, a part of working with that in organization is how to measure, monitor, and act on that.
Yeah, and maybe I'll pick up here, Lars, a little bit about the measuring. So, many of us on this webinar realize that organizational happiness is the right thing to do. We may have anecdotal evidence that when people are happy, they perform better, they're sick less, they collaborate better, they're more innovative, it's more fun to work with them. You might feel that for yourselves, you might feel that for your colleagues. And so that's all great. And typically, to be able to really invest in implementing organizational happiness as a priority, one needs to, just the way organizations work in 99% of the cases, you need to justify that investment, right? So when Lars talked about the business case, you have to get some data to show that. So let me do a quick survey here, and you can either, for those of you I can see, you can either put up your hands or you can type in a number. Is your company investing currently in measuring employee happiness? So one is, no, it's not doing it. Two would be an annual survey. Once a year, it does a survey. 5 is, yeah, every week, there's some kind of feedback. Rochelle, you're working in a company that's doing some best practices, pulse survey. Some of you, so Blanca also at a 5, but many of you are at a 1. Your companies are at a 1, which means really not much commitment to monitoring employee happiness. Yeah, I think as you see the numbers coming in, 1s and 2s are predominant, and there are some 3s and 5s, which is great. So it is possible. There are certainly different ways to get data. And Lars, if you go to the next slide, I want to introduce to you the motivational landscape, which is developed through Lars's, but it's referred to in his book. What I want to let you know is that it part of what Lars has made available, it's open source. So I want to share with you the 10 questions that it comes from the science of happiness. So thinking about PERMA and then breaking it into purpose, strengths, and compassion. What are 10 questions that correlate to those three areas? So these are the 10 questions. You can read them. There's an overarching question, which is, I feel happy at work. Give that a score from 0 to 100. And then the supporting questions. I'm proud of being part of my organization. Score that. I know how I contribute to the mission of my organization. I would recommend a friend to a job here. I have the opportunity to do what I do best. You might be thinking, oh yeah, that relates to strengths. I have the opportunity to learn, grow, and develop. I have the resources available that enable me to do a good job. And then the last three questions relating to compassion. I feel people care about me. I get recognition or praise. My opinion counts, right? So this is a pulse survey. It takes about, 45, 60 seconds for someone to quickly answer those questions. They have been made available now on a platform. You can take it on your phone, your mobile device, your laptop. But the idea is that this kind of pulse survey done regularly allows leaders to get data prior to implementing organizational happiness, during the process, and afterwards, right? So you create a baseline and you can measure how these scores move based on certain things that the organization is trying differently. So two things I want to emphasize. A, the motivational landscape is one of many different pulse surveys out there. We believe it's easy to use. It's available for you to use for 3 months if you take the longer course that we're part of. But Lars and I did want to make sure that these 10 questions were available for you, so you can also take them and adapt it and use it for your organization. So if you don't measure it, it's very hard to show that the things that you are doing is actually having any impact on these areas that we've identified matter, right? Strengths-based leadership, compassionate leadership, and an organization where people have clarity on purpose. Lars, anything you want to add, or should we go to the...
I just wanted to say that the example here is taken from a group that we did this the pulse survey on, or they participated in a pulse survey, and so that's just why it looks like this. And I want to say the question that it's almost, I think, best practice in this area, as I see it now, when you work with organizations, is to also work with an employee net promoter score. It's almost like you have a customer net promoter score, but you also have an employee net promoter score, which is linked to one of the questions here also. So for those of you who are up there on a 4, on a 5, and a 5, there's also an opportunity to work further with this. And please take this. This is this you can use. It's a platform and a supporting we're happy to offer. And the next thing, I just wanted to say, putting it all together, and I wanted to be mindful of time here because we want to leave also room for questions from all of you, or comments. But I just wanted to share a game plan and a roadmap. This is very high level, but this just to show you how we are working with organizations in terms of implementing organizational happiness. Now we have talked through some of the best practices that we are working with, but this is a game plan that you can use. Fill it out if you want to. But basically, it's about establishing a team that works with organizational happiness. Who are the key stakeholders? Doing the assessment that Mohit just made, so to create a baseline, and then decide on actions and focus depending on the 3 pillars of organizational happiness. What is it that you're going to do the next quarter or even 2 quarters? And what is it that you're going to achieve? Looking a little bit at the mission or at the goals here, and also defining some. It says at the bottom here, KPIs, key performance indicators. What does success look like? What does it look like when we're really good at what we're doing? So just sharing that as a high level, maybe a framework or tool to start reflecting about organization happiness. What can I do in my organization? And reach out, of course, if you need details on some of these. We are sitting on so much information right now, and there's so much going on right now in this space, organizational happiness. So there's a lot of knowledge and data that we can share, both Mohit and I. Reach out on LinkedIn or other platforms. Let me see here. This one, I just want to introduce what we're kicking. Mohit, you mentioned in the beginning, and this is just taking 2 minutes, I think, before we go into question and answer, but we're kicking off the organizational happiness course. Some of you said you were looking into taking this. We're kicking it off the 25th of January, and there are 5 modules structured like this, following a little bit of what we just went through. A really, really cool certificate, I think. I think this is one of the coolest certificates I've seen. Not joking, or joking aside a little bit, but we're very proud of what we're offering here, because this will be the 4th cohort, the 4th team of organization happiness practitioners, and the feedback we had so far is very, very good. So we're getting together a little group of people here on the 25th and start working with that.
Lars, if you go back 1 slide, so what I think you read in the description of this webinar, that one is we wanted to offer you some key takeaways on each of these topics, right? The science of happiness is where I talked about PERMA as an overarching framework, those 5 pillars. The business case is where Lars showed you some of the data on organizations that are implementing this, what goes up and what goes down, but leading to basically an impact on the financial bottom line. In the happiness sweet spot, Lars talked about how from PERMA, in the context of organizations, we focus on purpose, strengths, and compassion. And then I briefly introduced you to the motivational landscape and the 10 questions as one way to measure and monitor how your organization is doing on this hard to measure concept of happiness. And then in putting it all together, Lars showed you that one kind of slide where you can put this all on a Q1, Q2, Q3, Q4. What are our objectives? What's the business case? Who's the team? A format that really works in order to share this information across your organizations. Now, we spent 5 minutes literally on each of these topics. And in the course, the certification course that launches in exactly 2 weeks from now, there's going to be an hour and a half on each topic. We keep it the cohort small so that there's learning from peer to peers. And really, Lars is leading the process. I come in as a guest speaker, but it's the how to do all of this in a way that you have all the support and resources that you need. So that's kind of the longer journey we'd invite you to be on. And after that journey, of course, the certificate is one that you will have earned. So I'll just drop in a link, whether it's yourself, someone who might be interested in this course, or someone in your organization. I've just dropped in the link where you can just go in and ask for more information. But Lars, to your point, I think we should just now, I think hopefully everyone has the details, the longer journey, and maybe just open it up for Q&A and we can stop sharing screen.
Yeah, and I wanted to say also that yeah, so we are aiming for in 2 weeks' time that we're collecting a little group of. I would like to have 14 or 15 people there, and I think we have like 10 already. So that's the kind of group we try to work with from different perspectives, different organizations, and normally it's a spread. If you take a globe, it's a spread of people from starting from. Now we have Myanmar, I think, from Asia until US and South America. So a little space for question, comments, considerations. Up to
I have a question.
Michelle.
Hi, thank you very much for the information. It was very valuable. I'm a well-being and happiness manager here in Aruba for a large organization. And I was wondering, one point I'm struggling with is the evaluation and the monitoring. The measure, monitor, and act part. Because is sending out a survey one of the biggest and only way to measure the happiness? And if we're doing activities, is that the only way to measure our progress? Thank you.
Thank you, Russell. Very good question. Answer is no. And I think because there are many ways to measure, of course, but I think what is important, and I think the message here that we're trying to convey here is that it's important that you are measuring, that you're establishing a platform that you're able to communicate something that is more than a feeling, or more than I feel that we're talking about mental health and well-being a lot these days in our organizations, and I think we need to, in order to be able to work strategically with it, we need to both have the business case, and we need to have I call it a KPI, a key performance indicator on it, and that's why I want to measure, because then we can see that things are moving in the right direction. Or maybe we need to start have different conversations in our organization or different initiatives. But I think there are many ways to measure, monitor, and follow up on organization happiness and well-being, as you say. That's also we'll be spending more time on that in the course, of course. But maybe you have some. I'm sure you have some experience also sitting in the role that you have.
Rochelle, I want to just add, firstly, thank you so much for your question. And just to clarify that 10 question survey, we call it a pulse survey in the sense that it doesn't feel like a long survey. It's very short, it's frequent. But to your point, usually what we do is we like to have some quantitative data, but also some qualitative data. So being able to talk to people who have been through a process where, let's say, maybe the employee review system changed to a strengths-based system, and have people talk about, well, how are your one-on-ones now? How is it working with your colleagues? How are you feeling more valued? So I think getting people's stories of how it's impacted them psychologically, how it's impacted their motivation, how it's impacted their ability to get the job done, I think those would be powerful testimonials to supplement any numbers. Thank you for the question. I see another question coming into the chat box. Rachel, you ask, I'm curious on your thoughts and experience in organizational happiness within the context of a unionized environment. Lars, can I hand that over to you? Because I'll quickly mention my two shortcomings there. The one shortcoming is I haven't had that context where we've been working with an organization and someone says, oh, these are the things you can and can't do because of the union concern. My quick understanding of, if I were implementing any kind of program, I would be first clear about what are the do's and don'ts from a union point of view. And my guess is a lot of the organizational happiness approaches would not go against any of the don't do's, but I would make sure to check that and not violate any union agreements. Lars, I don't know if you've had any working experience on that particular topic.
Yeah, we have a few organizations, and this is a very good question because it speaks to, I think, the stakeholder mapping of a project like this, because that's in some organization the unions and that relation is a heavy stakeholder in terms of getting somewhere and getting success with your organization happiness project. In that case, I think, and I know we spent time on the business case and the measuring, and in that case, it's not so much that, I think, speaking to that stakeholder, it's more related to speaking to the well-being of the individuals in the organization, speaking to sick leaves, speaking to stress, and see how can we work with that, because I think we all want to, now I'm getting a little passionate about it and getting into it, but we all want to go to work using our superpowers for the purpose of the organization. And we don't want to be sick, and we want to have a balanced life. I mean, and this is what you can offer through organization happiness, I think, but you need to have a little bit of a different narrative in terms of speaking to unions, which are more employee champions, I would say, than speaking to the business case, because sometimes it's not that important. They are not shareholders, but they are stakeholders.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. So can I tie in your response to another question, which was from Tej? How do you think I, as an employee, can introduce this concept to my managers and administrators? And I think in the stakeholder mapping, Lars, what you refer to is different stakeholders have different interests, and to be able to understand the interests of, in this case, your manager, administrators, and speak to those interests and correlate the outcomes that one would expect from implementing organizational happiness to an interest that they have. This might tie back to the business case, Tej. Dion, to your point also, on the union issue, typically wellness increases attentiveness and therefore fewer injuries. That might be a great way to speak to that particular stakeholder on the benefits. Tim, I see you have your hand up, as does Professor. Tim, do you want to go first? And then Arup, you have a question too?
Sure, I appreciate it. Thank you for the information. It's very interesting. I have kind of a more fundamental question, but it kind of ties into these as well. I've recently been interviewing a lot of leaders and executives about leadership happiness. And I find when I use the word happy, it's a little squishy, and people get kind of turned off, like, oh, he's one of these hippie people. If I change it to more like leadership satisfaction, fulfillment, it's a little bit more palatable to a lot of people. Have you seen this, where this word happy is just, it kind of has a bit of a stigma, and it's almost too bad, because it's a good word. It has good meaning behind it.
Yeah. Very good comment. It's almost like it's the story of my professional life the last 10 years that you're describing. But I think that we need to be a couple of things. First thing, I think we need to be a little brave and call it what it is, because it is about happiness. And then, of course, some boardrooms, some executive management teams, they check out because they start to see you as a hippie happy. And that's why we emphasized a little bit on the business case, because sometimes you need to step into that boardroom and put on your best suit and your tie, and you need to talk about the business case for organizational happiness, how you measure, what's the return on investment. And sometimes Mohit and I, we talk about it as the Trojan horse. I mean, you bring in the business case and you start initiatives that is related to well-being, mental health, and happiness. And if you start that journey, there's no way back if you start that journey and you see the results. So that's the other part of it. But I as you say, Tim, I see that not every day, but every week I have this conversation, and I think also on the book, actually I choose to call it Organization Happiness, but I had many considerations or many inputs for what to call that book, because it could be called, like you said, well-being or something else, but then it wouldn't have been a #1 bestseller in Japan, right? Or in the US.
Great, thank you.
Thank you, Tim.
Professor Roop Barman, you have your hand up. You'll need to come off mute if you want to ask a question. Or anyone else, feel free to jump in. Lars, I'll read off one question that I skipped earlier that's coming in the chat. So Akna asks, I'd love to know, what are some steps one can take to start changing the narrative of employee wellness and happiness?
Yeah, I think I need to know more.
Yeah, yeah, changing from what to what, right?
Yeah. Can you elaborate, Agna? Are you able to? That'd be nice. Francesca, are you following up on that?
Okay, if the person who asked that question wants to go ahead and like have more detail, I will let them. Like I want to give them a chance to answer, but I had like a somewhat similar question, but it might be a different context.
Go for it.
Go ahead.
Okay. So I'm working with a startup that kind of me and a few friends of mine, we decided to do a startup, and it's kind of like in tech, and I think we are basically like about a year old, and I am perhaps the only one in our team who's like more interested in like psychology and organizational happiness, and like the rest of my team is very, very business oriented, very like finance oriented, you know. And so I was kind of wondering, is it like, is there a prerequisite of like where you should be at before, like as an organization, whether it's like a stage of being a startup before you can start thinking about these things? It's sort of, I don't know like how to introduce these topics, or like if so much is changing when you're a startup, and you're kind of like still building all this groundwork. I think it's somewhat, you could almost think about it like in two different perspectives. On one hand, I feel like it's the perfect opportunity and the perfect time to really focus on our foundation so that we can really build the organization if it will be successful in the long run. But at the same time, you know, in terms of like daily priorities, sometimes it's super easy to like for everything to get lost and to focus more on like the immediate like life or die kind of thing. I just was curious like how you would approach it.
Yeah, I think trying to keep it short, of course, Francesca also, but I just to share a little bit about how we work when we work with a group of people or with a management team. It's like we talk about, I mean, first to create the foundation to say this is important, because if you want to be sustainable, successful, you need to look at this. I mean, for sure. Have a short-term success, but then you will have a heart attack, or you will, or top talent will leave you, or whatever. So if you want to focus on sustainable success, one of the things is that you need to focus on this, and then you can start have a conversation, maybe just about the 3 areas in the happiness sweet spot. That conversation, say, where are we today? You could say on a scale from 0 to 100 with your management team or your partners, you can say, where are we today? Where do we want to be? And what do you think we should do to move that scale? I think that kind of conversation is something that you could do. It doesn't take 2 days away from your productivity, but it takes maybe an hour or 2 hours, and then a follow-up on each management team meeting. But sometimes highlighting where we are and where we want to be, and some of the important actions or behavioral change that we want to see is sometimes we work on that. And if you work on that and are measuring on the same time, I don't think you would be doing that. But if you're measuring, you should be able to see that when you're working on it, your pulse survey is going a little bit up in that area that you're working on. So I think there's a connection there.
Yeah, Francesca, thanks for the question. Lars, I think great points. And having worked in startup environment quite a bit earlier on, and then coaching startups, I think especially when you're running very hard, the culture you create really allows you to get up and try again. So for example, when you're pitching investors, right? If you have that sense that, oh, I pitched and I failed to get an investment, and I feel badly, and my teammates are like, oh, they don't appreciate that effort. There's not a culture of looking at failure as, for example, as the effort put in. That can lead to burnout very fast. It can lead to lower success rates versus the culture of, let's say, compassion, right? Or the culture of giving feedback and saying, this is what you did really well in that pitch. We have another pitch in a few days. Let's build on our strengths. So I actually think it's not about taking time out to sleep 8 hours. Maybe there's a phase where the founders are sleeping less than 8 hours, which is not ideal, but that's the sacrifice. And there's a culture that makes them more resilient, that makes them more optimistic, that makes them easier to get up after a failure. And a lot of the things Lars talks about in his book, the things we talk about in our course, is about the culture. And so rest and recuperation, sure, part of it. But in the organizational context, it's a lot about the motivation and your why and how you treat each other. Yeah, which don't take extra time. Yeah.
Thank you so much to both of you.
Thanks, Francesca, for the questions. Lars, we have 1 minute left. So I think 1 minute left, given that we've gone 15 minutes above with Q&A. What do you want to have a kind of a last word on this? Do you want to take another question? What are your thoughts?
No, I just want to say thank you, and thank you for the excellent questions here. It also shows that there's a lot going on, and I want to build on that because we see that Mohit and I see, and even with the center, there is so much going on in this area. So if you look at the almost 50 people that we had in the room today here, I think it's important that we connect and co-create. And so at least for me, and I know I can speak on behalf of Mohit, I'm happy to connect. Please reach out. I'm happy to help also, and don't be shy. I think all of us that are interested in this should be doing more together, because there are so much happening and there's so much potential, both for us as individuals, but also for the organizations that we work with, which is really why we're here. I think there's another opportunity. I think, okay, in 2 weeks' time, we're kicking off a little group here. I'm really looking forward to that. But also, I think we are meeting in March in Costa Rica. Also, there is a conference and organization happening. It's also a place to go or log in or engage it. So please reach out, engage, or share information with all of us. That's why we're here. We're here to help each other. I think creating that win-win-win situation.
Thank you, everyone. Happy New Year! It's not too late to wish you, and do connect with us on LinkedIn or any shape or form that allows us to advance the conversation. So really appreciate your joining today. Take care. Bye for now. Thank you.
Thank you.